This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Happy end of the week, Las Vegas. And whether you're a gloom and doom news junkie who loves the messy stuff or more a feel-good story person, CityCast Las Vegas is your guide to all the good bits. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we're joined by executive producer Sonia Cho Swanson and special guest, 8 News Now morning anchor John Langler, and we're covering the U.S. Supreme Court reversal of a ban on bump stocks, more giant verdicts against Las Vegas-based Real Water, and Nick Cage showing up at the Las Vegas courthouse for jury duty. It's Friday, June 21st. I'm David Figler. Here's what Las Vegas is talking about. John and Sonia, welcome to the Friday News Roundup.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, David, before we get into the news of the week, can we spill some tea about a really messy Twitter battle or war, whatever you're going to call it? I think something got taken down by the Nevada Democrats.
Well,
this feels messy. I enjoy this.
Yeah, the Nevada Democrats kind of got taken down. In all the high drama of a bunch of high school meme kids tweeting at each other and doing some bullying online, I guess the comms people over at the Nevada Democrats found, what do the kids call it, a dank meme? It was viewed by millions.
I don't think they're kids anymore, David. That's a pretty old reference.
Yeah, I guess that is. That just ages me, and I'm sorry. But what happened here is that I guess they found a meme that was basically from another ex-user that said, essentially, and this is the context, the bribes I took did not influence me to become evil. I was evil from the beginning, and the bribes were merely a bonus. And so the Dems put
and with the photo of
Lombardo.
Governor Joe Lombardo.
Yeah, but if you did any research,
not actually his quote, right?
No, it's not actually his quote. And what I'm saying is, if you did any research, you will see that literally millions of retweets of this quote with 100 different pictures from Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to our own Jackie Rosen to others. But the one with the picture of Joe Lombardo particularly caught the ire of the Nevada GOP. And then they just went on full blast with almost every member of the Assembly and the Senate coming out, calling for the Dems to apologize and saying that this was outrageous. And then it started making news cycles. And then the Dems took it down because of a copyright issue, because they used a photo of Lombardo that David Calvert had taken, and he asked them to take it down. David Calvert, associated with the Nevada Independent. And then John Ralston, the dean of political punditry, said, Dems, what the hell are you doing here? And then the Republicans are saying, yeah, see, even John says you should take it down, and blah, 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 blah. And this thing has snowballed into what's a real mean girl fight.
I was just going to say, it gets to the idea, especially in the political season, maybe you hold off before you press send or you press post, just to make sure, because you don't want to stir up trouble like this that you don't really need.
Well, a lot of the GOP people, they're making videos like, this is outrageous. You're accusing our governor of bribery and you have no proof. And it's like, so the Dems double down and they were like, well, this is just a meme. Like, do you not know how the internet works? But also, by the way, Lombardo accepted millions and millions of dollars from slumlords and then in service of that, rejected and vetoed all tenant rights protections and things like that. So it's still going to go back and forth and back and forth. And the question is, should their internet privileges be like taken away, all of them? Like, if you're going to punish high school kids for bullying each other, like, shouldn't that be the remedy? Like, you can't use the internet for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the problem with this quote is that, I mean, I think we all get what a meme is. We all get that it's a shared internet phenomenon that gets passed on and, so forth. But this quote was a little bit too real is the problem. It sounds a little bit too much like an actual politician's words. And I think that's where a lot of the misunderstanding is. And also, not everyone's on Twitter. I know that we all like to think that, like, Twitter mirrors the real world, but we're not all on Twitter. So I do think the Dems are playing with fire there.
Anyone have any last words on this?
Less is more. Less is more. Both political parties. Pick your spots.
Right? Everyone's trying to be clever and everyone just kind of makes themselves look foolish. So, well, we'll see if this Twitter war continues or not, and if the GOP has any, what we calling them, dank memes, or only old people like me call them dank memes anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, accurate.
All right. So, John, let's get into some real analysis here and not this garbage. So, John, the U.S. Supreme Court name-checked Las Vegas multiple times in their recent decision concerning a ban on bump stocks. So tell us why Vegas is all caught up in this court decision.
Well, David, as you know, bump stocks are something well known after the 1 October shooting. The man who committed that horrible shooting on the Strip used a form of bump stocks, according to police, in the attack. So right after that, not long after that, there was a Trump-era bump stock ban, and that was pretty much bipartisan support. Went through, it was put into place, and there were immediately court challenges. And so that's what you're referring to here. The Supreme Court overturned the ban last week. They determined the Trump administration didn't follow the law. Justice Thomas said an interesting quote. He said basically a semi-automatic rifle is not an illegal machine gun because it doesn't make the weapon fire more than one shot with a single trigger pull. A bump stock merely reduces the amount of time that elapses between. It's technical, but the Supreme Court ruling opens the door to legislation down the line. It's a technical ruling, to be sure. But certainly, I mean, for anyone who's here during 1 October, anything that deals with bump stocks has a lot of different reactions, and it's a visceral response, I think, from a lot of folks.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people blame that bump stock for allowing the deranged shooter to take out so many people. I mean, 60 lost lives and hundreds of people injured, which wouldn't have been able to have occurred but for these bump stocks.
Yeah. Now, it's worth pointing out that after the ruling from the Supreme Court, the Nevada congressional delegation, the Democrats, certainly even Governor Lombardo, all said that they were disappointed. They were angry with the ruling. As you know, Governor Lombardo was the sheriff when the shooting happened. And right after that, Senator Rosen, Senator Cortez Masto, and others have been trying to push forward this bump act in Washington to sort of pull back what the Supreme Court has taken away on a federal level. But unlike the previous bump stock ban, this doesn't really seem to have as much bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. So it may be up to the states moving forward. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, John, it was during the Trump era when this initial ban occurred through an ATF classification of what is a machine gun. And that was the very, very hyper-technical issue in front of the Supreme Court. And as you also said, it seems like it was ruled on these almost mechanical grounds and not necessarily legal grounds.
Literally.
So, yeah, I mean, Sonia, the GOP lawmakers in the U.S. Senate seems like they aren't getting behind this bump act, this effort to actually ban these kind of devices. Have we lost the runway that October 1 gave the world to make bipartisan progress on gun control reform?
You know, I might be a little pessimistic here, but I find myself questioning whether we had that runway at all. I was actually just looking back at what are some of the most horrific mass shootings we've had in recent American history and what's happened in Congress. Y'all remember Sandy Hook, the horrible shooting in Connecticut of an elementary school. After that, several lawmakers tried to pass federal legislation against assault weapons, and those failed. Those bills failed in Congress. But what we did see, and this goes back to what you were saying, John, is we saw some statewide efforts actually able to move forward. So there were laws passed in Connecticut, gun reform laws passed in Connecticut after Sandy Hook. There was a law passed in Florida after the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting that raised the age to buy firearms in Florida to 21. And then in Nevada, after October 1, we had these red flag laws that got passed to help identify individuals who maybe shouldn't be purchasing guns for the safety of those around them. So maybe statewide and state by state is the way to go. But the other, I guess, caveat to that is that we know that guns can cross state lines. So maybe that's, piecemeal.
Yeah. And this recent Supreme Court decision didn't rule on Second Amendment grounds. So gun control is still kind of up in the air. Is there any common ground to be found on gun control?
Well, I think, David, we've all seen what's been going on in Capitol Hill. There seems to be very little common ground on anything, and gun control is top on the list of what's had little common ground for decades, despite these horrible shootings. Uvalde, Stoneman, 1 October. I mean, we could go on and on, as you know. It'll be interesting to see, depending on what happens in November, if there's a change in the makeup of the delegation in the Senate and the House and in the White House, if there's any sort of change in mentality. But it's interesting that now that this Bump Act is trying to do what had already been achieved, if Republicans are resistant to this, if that would ever change. It seems like if they're trying to plow over ground they've already been on, if they're really going to want to do it again, as obviously gun control advocates would like to.
Where do you see common ground, David?
Well, Sonia, I was going to ask you, I mean, because this is such a personal issue for us here in Las Vegas. Yes. And as I mentioned, the Supreme Court specifically talks in their decision about this Las Vegas shooting. And I know that when this ruling came out, a lot of local folks were interviewed. How do you explain to someone who lives in Las Vegas during that time frame, because we all, felt this at our very core, that there is some legitimate use for a device like a bump stock that outweighs what we all saw? How do we make that emotional plea to get to some common sense legislation?
You know who I find really inspiring in this conversation is lawmaker Sandra Jauregui. She's an assemblywoman who was actually present at the Route 91 festival during the October 1 shooting. It actually took her a few years to be able to come out and talk about it publicly. But once she did, her personal story, I think, was very moving. And so I think if we can find more folks who've experienced this firsthand to get into public service, that could be very powerful.
It's not just the people who are physically injured that are impacted, although obviously they bear the brunt of it, but the psychological damage for those people and their families and for a community. I mean, you remember what it was like. People were rushing to blood banks to donate, to give to other people, to try to figure out how they could help others heal for the short term, but also the long term. And then you get a decision like this on what seemed, again, to be very hyper-technical grounds, and it's hard maybe to...
And also just such a sliver of a narrow ban, right? This is not a ban to outlaw all assault weapons. This is a ban on a very specific piece of technical equipment.
I think one of the challenges is, we all were here when this was going on, is, we can channel the emotion of what happened very quickly. I can look back, I was anchoring when it happened here at Channel 8. And I can remember when this was all happening, speaking with people as they were running away, listening, all the sounds, all the visuals. We can replay that, some of us without having to actually watch the video or listen to the audio. We can replay it in our minds. And it's hard, I think, for those of us in Las Vegas on this specific issue to separate the emotion and in this case, potentially the law, depending on how it's interpreted in the Supreme Court. That's what the justices determined, but they weren't here. And I think if, when you're talking about gun control or any sort of legislation like this, emotion isn't a law necessarily. And trying to find the legislative solution is what is longer lasting than an emotional solution. But it's hard for those of us who are here to want to try to not be emotional about a topic like this because of what it did to the Valley and how it still is here.
It's still here. And I think that's the main point, John, is that even though this was, and it's hard to even, when I say these words, I don't even believe it, almost 7 years ago that happened, it seems so fresh and raw and open. And this decision doesn't help for the healing, that's for sure. So we'll see what the response is going to be. Hopefully it's common sense.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
All right. Topic 2. There was an eye-popping civil jury verdict by a Las Vegas jury awarding billions to some people who purchased and drank something called real water. Sonia, that's a big verdict. What happened here?
Oh, David. Yeah. In fact, according to one of the lawyers involved in the case, this is the most money ever awarded by a jury in Nevada.
Wow.
So within the last week or so, a Las Vegas jury awarded plaintiffs in a bottled water lawsuit $3 billion in damages. This is, in fact, not the first lawsuit against real water, which, by the way, maybe not so real. Real water claimed to be, go ahead.
It's like the irony is right there. If someone's calling itself real water, when we all know what actual water is, if it adds anything, maybe
Watch
not.
out.
So, yeah.
Watch out. Yeah. So real water claimed to be this alkalized water, and it was supposed to have health benefits, but it actually contained a toxic chemical used in rocket fuel. It was tied to at least one death in 2020 and multiple hospitalizations for liver failure. Several of the plaintiffs were actually small children. And this was pretty bad product that was actually produced in Las Vegas. Several of the plaintiffs actually had to be flown to Salt Lake City to receive liver transplants, but they were actually able to avoid the liver transplant when they stopped drinking the quote unquote real water.
And I also saw in that there were kids who developed cirrhosis of the liver, which, is something that often is associated with older people who've been drinking for a very long time. And this was happening to children.
Small children. Yeah. Pretty terrible stuff. But I think what this comes down to is sort of the glow of health and safety that exists around bottled water, especially certain kinds that purport to have all kinds of benefits for you. And it kind of boils down to a bigger debate. Is bottled water actually safer and better for you? And David,
than just drinking out of the old tap that comes from Lake
drinking out of
Mead?
the old tap. So, David, you might know that before I came to CityCast, I worked for a podcast called Gastropod, and we actually did a couple of episodes on bottled water. They're fantastic. I recommend them. But one thing I learned from working on those episodes is that in terms of the debate of bottled versus tap, right? Bottled water is regulated by the FDA because it's actually considered a packaged food product, even though, by the way, side note, a lot of bottled water comes straight from the tap in a lot of cities. And meanwhile, tap water is regulated by the EPA, and their standards for bottled water and tap water are actually very similar. However, here's one caveat. The EPA is required to notify us immediately when something goes wrong with tap water. Bottled water, not so much. There's a recall requirement, but they're not held to quite the same notification standards. So safety-wise, bottled water, tap water, kind of on par. Notification-wise, you're actually going to find out about safety issues with your tap water sooner than you are than with bottled water.
Interesting. John, what's your water consumption source of choice?
I am a strong proponent of thermos and my filtered tap water, and that's what I do. I almost never drink bottled water. You mentioned, Sonia, something interesting. Speaking of Las Vegas ties, I'm reminded of a show, I think it was on Showtime, called, for lack of a better word, BS, that Penn and Teller used to do on cable way back in the day. And I'll never forget, they did a whole bit about bottled water and how it comes from, in most cases, tap water. You think natural spring, and it's really from some enormous tank in San Bernardino County or something.
Natural spring, yes. This bucolic setting where ferries have little vessels that just sort of gently transport the water from a pristine lake into your bottle in your house.
A lot of tap water is actually delicious. Let's be real. Some of it's kind of famous, actually.
Yeah, well, I get that. Yeah. But so what was the windup there, John, on the Penn and Teller show?
Oh, it was essentially what Sonia was talking about, is that they did taste tests of bottled water, and they would do in some restaurant. Now, again, theirs were sort of laced with comedy, so there was sort of that tinge around it.
Well, that's better than rocket fuel, John.
Well, fair enough.
Lace your water with something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's always stuck with me. So I rarely drink bottled water. Plus, especially in the desert heat, right? It just doesn't stay cold. Versus you get a nice thermos or whatever, and it stays cold. So that's where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
See, I look at it as a little bit of a hype thing, which is so Las Vegas. I mean, the founder of it is a gentleman named Brent Jones. Brent Jones was a lawyer, but also a politician. I mean, he served as a Republican member of the Nevada Assembly for a cup of coffee, as our friend John Ralston would say. 2014 to 2016. But he was really hawking this stuff as though it were, a miracle of science and nature. And boom, now we're talking about billions of dollars in damages, Sonia.
Gosh. Well, here's my question, actually, because I think this company is bankrupt. So can anyone actually get any money out of this, David?
Yeah, it sounds like they're bankrupt on a lot of different levels, including morally.
Right.
However, it's really, bankruptcy is complicated, and they went real early with declaring bankruptcy, both personally, and then there was also this DOJ investigation, which made them shut down the business. So I don't know how many assets are there, but this thing could be litigated for a really long time. There are some other parties involved, and there might be some insurance out there somewhere. But yeah, it makes it very, very difficult for people to actually see the money that these giant verdicts resulted in.
Interesting.
And just what I was going to say is when it comes to big verdicts, getting back to our previous conversation, how long it's taken and the process it took to get victims and survivors of 1 October, the settlement through MGM, the Alex Jones relationship with Sandy Hook and that whole civil litigation, environmental issues when there's brownfield sites and environmental cleanups, how long it takes for that whole civil process to go through. So that's the frustration for the families who've been affected by this real water verdict is, like you say, it's a big settlement, but it's going to take a while before they get sort of financial remedies beyond just the health remedies.
Yeah, I wonder if these lawsuits lead to actual changes in consumer protections and safety. What do you think?
The fact that it's made the news and the fact that we're talking about it certainly suggests that it's going to have at least an awareness and a media ripple effect, right? What I'm hoping is that people start to change their perspective on bottled water. And I hope that people sort of start to question some of the spurious health claims that packaged bottled water or packaged foods like to intimate on their labels, and start to actually do their research and think about, what is that alkalized water actually going to do for me? And could tap water be just as good? So that's maybe the beginning of one kind of public awareness piece of this.
Yeah. What do you think needs to happen now, John?
Well, you talk about it all comes down to regulation. So beyond just this real water case, and I think one of the reasons among many the penalty is so high is the time span between when the company found out there was a problem, when the regulators found out there was a problem with the water, when the people, like the space and the delay it took to notify folks, probably had some also element in terms of the penalties, whether it's in this settlement, this district court case in Clark County. But moving forward, Sonia, as you talked about, having more oversight, having more testing, having more regulation on these, anything that we're putting into our body can only be good, just so that at least we know what we're ingesting. So we don't have to deal with all the salmonella outbreaks and all the, pieces of plastic that get found in children's food and all of these things. That's not right. And, eventually it gets found, but it always takes so long. So any way that regulators can do something about this would probably be good for our health.
Well, the pushback on that always, John, is that with extra regulation comes extra costs. Extra costs are passed on to consumers. Everything becomes way more expensive. And there's a lot of political philosophies out there that less regulation needs to happen. How do you accord all that,
Well, I guess then the question becomes, do you pay now or pay later?
Well, there you go. There's the T-shirt.
Do you pay to make sure your product is safe in the beginning, or do you pay your legal fees at the back end when something horrible goes wrong, which hopefully it doesn't? Yeah.
The wild thing about these giant punitive awards, like $3 billion and stuff, is that those are given after the lawyers, of course, take their cut. Let's hear it for the lawyers. It goes to the handful of people who are impacted. So let's say that they did have $3 billion, this company, which it doesn't seem like they do. But let's say they did. That would be divided mostly amongst just the couple of few people who sued. And I wonder if there should be a discussion about, like, when punitive damages are awarded by a jury, that it goes to the public to do these kind of things, to do these sort of regulations, to make sure that enforcement is around. It's a discussion no one seems to want to have. Do you think, Sonia, that people who are injured should get these giant awards, or that the giant awards should go into society to help more people?
Oof. I think that's a leading question, David.
I mean, the incentive, for lawyers is that they will get these big awards. That's why they pursue these things. And if it's not there for their clients, there might not be a reason to pursue it as hard.
There's a reason that lawsuits are filed so quickly against Formula One and filed so quickly after all these events happen, these things happen, because there's money to be made, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So you're getting scammed by the water, you're getting scammed by the lawyers, you're getting scammed by the government. Maybe we just turn to Twitter. That'll help us for discourse and problem solving.
Right.
All right, well, let's go on to our third topic. Speaking of civic engagement, famous Las Vegas resident Nicolas Cage of what I think is 6 different Vegas-based movies, maybe 7. The guy loves making films about Las Vegas. I mean, the guy loves making films. I think he's made 300 or 400 films. But he does get spotted in interesting places around Las Vegas, notably Frankie's Tiki Room. But this was kind of unusual. He showed up at the Regional Justice Center. He got called to jury duty, y'all, and Nick Cage showed up.
No one
showed
can
up to do his civic duty. I got tipped off to it. Some colleagues of mine who are lawyers down in the courthouse were like, holy shit balls, look who just showed up to court. And while he did not make it onto an actual jury, he did his duty. He spent his time. He watched the kooky old film that explained everything in the jury room. And then he got to go home, signed a few autographs, I understand, on his way out the door.
Nice.
Okay. So this was, maybe blown out a little bigger in proportion. We all have the duty. We all need to show up. If you don't show up, you could get in trouble. But he got dismissed from jury duty. I know the real reason. And it's not that important, nor is it interesting.
Wait, what is the real reason, David? No, what is the real reason?
They didn't need him. It wasn't like he was disqualified. It was just like, they always overshoot how many people they need for that day because you never know how many people need to get onto the jury.
Gotcha.
And I think that eventually, I think that was what it was. I think he actually wound up in one of the courtrooms, which is getting further than most people who get called to jury duty. But I don't think that they put him through the questioning, et cetera. Let's have some fun with this one, though, y'all. What do you think the reasons that Nick Cage got dismissed from jury duty? Wrong answers only.
All right. My wrong answer is that the case materially involved Nick Cage or his likeness thereof. And it was a divorce settlement dispute in which one partner cheated on the other with a Nick Cage blow-up doll. So obviously he couldn't be on the jury, right? Wrong answers only, right?
Well, your wrong answer is wrong.
I mean, it's a chef kiss. Wrong
it was
answer.
A chef kiss wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's as they say at the old Cosmo ads, the right amount of wrong.
Thank you.
John, why do you think Nick Cage got dismissed?
Oh, that was way more involved than mine, I have to say. But well, I just assumed the prosecution determined he was actually John Travolta, and they said,
my God, that was going to be mine, John. So good.
That is so good.
It was there for the taking, David. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. Is there a movie you're referring to?
I think it's really, he might actually be John Travolta.
Right.
No, it's Face Off.
Was Face Off real? Did it really happen, John?
It might have happened. They might have switched faces. I think the case was about somebody breaking into the Mob Museum and stealing important Las Vegas artifacts, which on the back have the map to the Binion silver fortune. And that it was just a little too close to home for Nick Cage, that he might have brought expertise into the jury room that you're not allowed to have.
Got it.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, this sounds so good. We have to apply for those film credits when the legislature allows that. This is going to top Paul Blart 2 as far as the biggest in Nevada movie with film credits ever made. We're
going to make Nevada history. I love it.
We are. And so goes into the history books this Friday News Roundup. John and Sonia, thanks so much for joining us here on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thanks, y'all.
My pleasure.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. Our executive producer is Sonia Cho Swanson. Our producer is Layla Mohammed. Our newsletter editor is Rob Katchel-Reese. And our hosts are Sarah Lohman and me, David Figler. Music is by OG Moose, Epidemic Sound, and All the Kimonos. We record the show on the traditional homelands of the Nuuvi, the Southern Paiute people. If you enjoyed the show, and we ask this all the time, go rate our show. It's so easy. Go on Apple Pod, Spotify, or wherever you listen to it. Hit 5 stars, leave us that review. We promise we'll read them. And subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Las Vegas. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Till then, everybody stay lucky.